on Tandala with Dr. Ayan. On Tandala with Dr. Ayan. We have the pleasure today of speaking with the Honorable Bishop Trevor Mwamba, who is currently serving as the President of the United National Independence Party, also known as UNIP. Bishop Trevor has a diverse background, including a background in law. He won the role of President of UNIP on April 4th, 2021. Today, he will speak to us about the highs and lows of UNIP's history. And what happened to its popularity. Let's get to it. On Tandala with Dr. Ayan. Welcome, Bishop Trevor Mwamba. Thank you for being a part of the Tandala program.
I'm very delighted to be with you, Doctor.
It's always a treat to talk to not only honorable people who are extremely knowledgeable on history and important aspects of African history that's taken place, but today we're going to specifically talk about UNIP's history, the party that you are currently a president of, the party that has reigned for 27 years here in Zambia from 1991, from 1964 to 1991, which is a total of 27 years.
Correct.
So we want to talk about the highs and lows. Before we get to that, before you got into politics, you were a bishop.
Yes.
A different type of public servant. Now you are a public servant in a different way. Tell us, how did that happen, that transition?
Yes, indeed. Yes. My life has transitioned at different phases. If I may go slightly back to my student days, I actually studied law. My intention in life was to become a lawyer. So I studied law at the University of Zambia and graduated in 1981. But then I realized then that my vocation or my drive, my desire, somehow was now inclined towards the church. And I was brought up as an Anglican. My parents were very devout Anglicans and worshipped at the Cathedral of the Holy Cross. So from law, I then felt drawn to the church. And so after graduating from the University of Zambia in 1981, I went to Oxford to read theology, study theology, and train for the Anglican priesthood. And when I completed that in 1984, I was ordained as a priest and worked briefly in London. Then I came back to Zambia in 1985, and then was appointed to become the General Secretary of what we call the Church of the Province of Central Africa, which is the Anglican Church in Botswana, Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. So I worked with all the bishops in these 4 countries. And then ultimately I then was appointed or elected Bishop of Botswana. So that's how I ended up being the bishop. And I served in Botswana as bishop for about 8 years, then went on to England, the Church of England. I was there as a bishop, and then Europe. And then in 2021, I was asked to consider coming back home and running for the position of president of the United National Independence Party, UNIP. And I was elected
in
president.
1991.
It was 2021. 2021, exactly.
You said 1921. I'm like, well, how old are you?
You're very sharp for lawyers. We like that. You picked it up very well. So 2021, yes, that's when I was elected the president of UNIP. And 3 months to go before the actual general elections, I was also the nominee as a presidential candidate of UNIP for the Republican presidency, and I didn't win, I didn't come last, I was somewhere in the middle, so that's how I ended up. So I transitioned
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. So as a bishop, it's a different form of service. But now I'm now in what I call my second phase of service.
Yeah.
But the calling is the same. It's
Yeah.
about service. It's about people. It's
Yeah.
about trying to improve the livelihood and welfare of our people. So this is
Yes.
where God has now pointed me to
led
become.
you, yes. So even while you were servicing for God,
That's right.
and you were away from Zambia, you were still very much a Zambian. I do know that before you even transitioned, you were in a lot of ways like not only a personal friend, but also an advisor to the former UNIP leaders, including the first president of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I've always had, of course, an interest in, of course, my country, Zambia. I'm a Zambian always, and great love for the country, and great love for the leaders that have been produced over time, but especially in the context of UNIP. President Kaunda, our first president, I knew him, in fact, as a family friend, but also from a personal context when I was 7 years old. That's when I came to know the president, to meet the president. At home, he had come to Chinsali, which is actually his birthplace, and my father was the first headmaster of the school, named after him, Kenneth Kaunda Secondary School, and he came to open the school. And I was 7 years old, and that's where I first met the president. And over time and over the years, we always kept in touch, and he would always ask me each time I visited Zambia, when are you coming back? When are you coming back? And so there was a close tie with him.
In American English, we call that foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing.
It
It makes a lot of
the
sense.
7-year-old kid who met him at that time, and now look at you as a grown man, as a president
That's
of the
right.
party that he represented for 27 years.
God works in mysterious ways. You're absolutely
Serendipity.
right. Serendipity, precisely.
Absolutely.
And you also mentioned, of course, in other contexts of other leaders within UNIP. There's some of our founding fathers and others, like Mr. Simon Kapwepwe, who also knew. And I remember a moment when he had then left UNIP and formed UPP, United Progressive Party, which is banned and all that. And I remember going with my father to visit Mr. Simon Kapwepwe at home. And he used this analogy or metaphor of life like a bicycle, and politics like a bicycle. And he said now the pedal in his political pedal had come down, but of course it always come up somewhere. And I remember that vividly. So there was him, and there were people like Mainza Chona. These are founding fathers of Zambia. So you're very right. I've always been very close to the history of the party and the country, because these were our pillars.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room, as we say in the U.S. So this was a party that was not only the UNIP party, not only a party for Zambia, but it was also recognizable in the Southern Africa region as well, right? So how does a party that was synonymous with struggle and peace and freedom for 27 years lose its high to a point in modern day today where it's just kind of known as a party of the past, a part of culture, although it's still very much active. Case in point, you being the president of UNIP.
Correct.
What happened? I do know when I was doing my research, I did learn that at some point, I can't remember which income, I think it was around in the 90s, that the Constitution was amended for whoever runs for president has to be Zambian born. And that immediately took Kenneth Kaunda out of the running anymore, although he was very much loved and respected. And UNIP, for as long as it's reigned, it never really had any stains of corruption, or at least that's publicly known.
Correct.
So it was high, very recognizable and known, and still is. It is a party that created, as in the newspaper that, the article that you wrote in the anniversary of the 60th anniversary of Zambia, I learned something from here, that the phrase itself, one Zambia, one nation, is a phrase of the UNIP party.
Correct. Yes.
So that's at least as someone who was in Zambia, and I didn't know that. So what happened?
Well, life happens, and in this context, of course, is to understand the environment of the times. If we look in terms of UNIP, in terms of its heydays, its golden age or era, prior to independence, of course, this was a movement, a party that was formed for Zambians, for all Zambians.
Yeah.
And the leadership incorporated all the 72 ethnic groups within Zambia.
Yeah.
It was representative of the whole Zambia. It was a movement.
Yes.
And the leadership was also extremely visionary. The youth, the women, and everybody. So this was a party that was there for the people. Then, of course, this was also a party in terms of values that exemplified service for the people.
Yes.
And the leaders were there for the people. It was about leadership which was self-sacrificing.
Yes.
It was about servant leadership.
Yes.
And so that is there. And of course, with
And it was intentional.
totally
was intentional.
The other dimension, of course, about understanding the roots of UNIP is that our leadership itself, our founding fathers and mothers, were very devout Christians that passed through, many of them educated through Christian schools, missionaries and so on, schools. President Kaunda himself, his father was a reverend, a Presbyterian minister. So those values were inculcated, and so there was a sense of love, sense of service, a sense of being there for the people. So that's how it begins. And then with independence, of course, having gained independence, the leadership and of UNIP and our leaders and all visionaries, any one of them could have been president, was there to now improve the welfare of the Zambian people.
Yes.
And there were only 3 secondary schools. You would be surprised at the time of independence. And then one of the focuses was about education, quality education. So schools were built in every province of Zambia. The University of Zambia was built. Then, of course, in terms of economic development, the economic space was opened up to enable the participation of our people in our economic sector. So these are the heydays. But then, of course, you go on to talk about UNIP in terms of its, golden days, as I'm expressing it, in terms of its, again, Pan-African approach. That this is a country, Zambia, through UNIP, that provided sanctuary to all the liberation movements in the region.
So has the country lost a spark for that Pan-Africanism? I mean, you mentioned the earlier years of the party UNIP. In the 70s, I think in the 80s, the country was very prosperous economically. There was a lot of prosperity. Copper, agriculture prosperity, coal was very big in the earlier years as well. Can we get that back? And is it because that Pan-Africanist spirit, that Ubuntu spirit, has kind of faded a bit?
We can.
I'm just talking about my perspective of what. So what happened with that? There's still strong resources here in Zambia.
Yes. Yes.
What do you think is contributing to, and something like to the economy being where it is? It could be better.
Of course.
It could be better.
Absolutely.
But since 1991, and even during UNIP's party, there were some struggles during that time as well.
Of course.
What were we doing in the 70s and 80s accurately that since then we're still struggling to get that level of prosperity back?
Indeed.
Zambia? I mean, the times have changed.
Of course. No, in fact, I was going to conclude. I was trying to give a picture of the beginning and the type of leadership that prevailed to enable Zambia to pick up and to move forward and to provide a sanctuary in terms of liberation movements. But that came with a price. There was a price. As a journalist who at one time actually was editor-in-chief of the Times of Zambia, his name is Richard Hall. He wrote a book entitled The Price of Principles. So Zambia is in this space, but it's surrounded by enemies. external enemies. So in terms of economic development and growth, there was what you might call sabotage.
Yeah.
So after Zambia's independence in 1964, our routes, the trade routes in terms of taking out the copper and our other resources was through the south. So in 1965, then Southern Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, declared UDI, Unilateral Declaration of Independence, on the 11th of November 1965. So our economic lifestyle was jeopardized. So we had to find alternatives. So there's a lot of money involved, there's a lot of thinking. So that's how the Tazara Railway was built. But having said that, what I'm trying to say that there was a price to pay.
Yeah.
So with Zambia being put in a very precarious economic survival, we also, that's the leadership of the time, had to look how we could be self-sufficient. So a lot of parastatal organizations were set up to make Zambia self-reliant. And that was progressing well. But of course, you know,
creating a circular economy within the country.
And of course, you have to also depend on assistance from outside. And there are those forces which do not like to see certain economies become independent, and so sabotage, you may use that phrase, begins to come in. So some of the problems that UNIP then began to face were not created from within, but from without. And so then the people began to suffer. If I may use an example in terms of our reliance on copper. Copper prices were doing extremely high until the 70s, when suddenly the prices dropped. And then oil prices went up. And in order to survive, we had to look for external funding. The IMF comes in, but they have conditions. And those conditions, of course, affect the livelihoods of our people. Removing subsidies on, basic foodstuff.
And that caused, like a domino effect.
Exactly. That caused riots, and also in context of privatizing this or that. And so those are the kind of like challenges the government had to deal with. So in the end, they thought the best way is to try to go it on our own. And there was a lot of problems with that.
So that's a pretty good summary of that. Thank you so much. That gives us a little bird's-eye view of what happened in terms of that high-level prosperity in the 70s and 80s, and what's taken place since then. Zambia is still a survivor.
Very much so.
Still surviving.
Very much so.
Every country has its challenges, and you find a way to serve the people. And I think even the current government is doing the best that they can. But let's revert back to UNIP.
Yes.
And the 27 years of its leadership. Can you share with us, because I know you're also a historian, you're full of volume, some key things that were the highs and the lows? Like, what were some challenges that UNIP had to overcome, and what were some key things that it will always be remembered for?
Indeed. Look, as I look, whether you're looking at a political party, whether you look at an institution, whether it's, say, the church, or whatever you may look at, you're looking at human beings at work in the various positions or institutions or corporations that they may find themselves in. So you have those moments, because of the caliber and the character of leadership, when things move and then things go down. Within UNIP, as I said at the very beginning, you had this crop of very able visionaries coming in. But there's politics. As the country progressed, for example, we're surrounded by enemies. And Zambia was a multi-party state. That means UNIP.
Enemies, who are you talking about?
I'll come to that in a split second. But a multi-party state, there was, for example, UNIP, there was the ANC, the African National Congress Party led by Harry Nkumbula, from which, of course, UNIP was more or less born, because you had ANC, then they broke away and formed ZANC, Zambia African National Congress, which was banned, and then UNIP was born.
Yeah.
So there's that. But after independence, there was a multi-party state existence within the constitution. But because the enemies, so Zambia is surrounded by the southern side, southern Rhodesia, which was led by Ian Smith, the white settlers. Mozambique was not independent. You had the Portuguese.
Yes.
Angola was under the Portuguese. And South Africa, you had under apartheid. And they were not amused that there you have this country, harboring and giving refuge to people who were fighting for liberation. So these enemies were intent on sowing chaos within this supporting country, this supporting party.
Yes.
So from the party context, it was then decided that in order to solidify our unity, social cohesion, it was imperative that we would be not divided by these enemies who would try and pick us off one by one, by causing division within chaos, precisely. So it was then decided to bring about what was called a one-party state, one-party democracy, one-party participatory democracy as it came to be known. But it was a negotiated process. It was not imposed. So that's how Zambia became a one-party state. So we're trying to see how to safeguard our independence and our vision for the future and so on. So that's how things happen. But at the same time, we must understand that Zambia was caught up in the terms of the geopolitics of the time. It was the time of the Cold War.
Yes.
And the Cold War, you had, starting off from the Second World War, you had, of course, the camp, the Western grouping, then you had, led by the Americans, and you had the Soviet Union as it was, you know, a communist bloc, and the politics which was being fought was about domination. But Zambia, again, in terms of the leadership of the time, decided not to be either. And hence what was known as a non-aligned movement of nation came about, and you had the great leaders such as President Kaunda himself, Pandit Nehru of India, you had Tito of Yugoslavia, you had Abdul Nasser of Egypt as pillars. But their position was simply that, look, we'll do business with whoever we want to do business with.
We're independent.
Of course, and that's the whole point. I'm using this as an example to talk about the economy later on and the resource. That having given this picture, even in terms of control of the resources, there was that drive that people wanted to take and put us in a certain camp, was the thinking. And this is the way to develop a country, is that the resource belongs to the people.
Yes.
And the people must benefit from those resources. And that was a way that was being pushed. But after 1989, I use that in the context of the Berlin Wall crumbled. And that in a way was a catalyst, or where Cold War rivalry somehow declined or disappeared. But then what was happening now was that the capitalist approach gained upper hand, and therefore the resources and things which of course ought to be shared and used for the benefit of everybody, again seemed to fall into a certain trajectory where only those with the means and the power would begin to benefit. So the copper mines and all these things now, under a new government, in 1991, UNIP loses power, MMD comes into power, and MMD is given the prescriptions of what should be done, what should be privatized, and now it's all free for all. And so we began to lose control, and suffering eventually, of course, began. And that brings us back to what you asked earlier in terms of the change in the Constitution.
Yeah.
That when people realized that things were not working out and the heaven promised was not there, that President Chiluba realized also that UNIP under President Kaunda was gaining that support back.
Yeah.
And so in fear of him, in fear of UNIP winning, he decided absolutely to change the Constitution by putting a provision which simply stated that if your parents were not born in Zambia, you could not be eligible to be president of Zambia. President Kaunda's parents came from Malawi. He was born in Zambia, but his parents, so he was disqualified. And that's how talk about democratization. These are pointers which show that, in fact, it was not democratic as the picture is painted to be.
Yes.
It began to bring in these undemocratic practices.
Yes.
And so then that also leads to,
Yeah.
the killing of the political space or democracy.
Yes.
And so these are things. So the heydays of UNIP, in my understanding and reading, is simply that this, in the positive context, was a party that was there for the people. It was a party that sought to bring about policies that were to improve the livelihood of our people. Education, as the case in point. Education in Zambia was free for everybody, from primary to tertiary, free. No one paid. I'm a beneficiary of that. The president, Hakainde Hichilema, is a beneficiary of that. All of us. And things, of course, changed after that. Now it's very difficult. So there is that dimension. And of course, you also have to look in context of control. UNIP sought to bring about control for Zambians in terms of the economic sector. That is not now prevailing. And yet, we should be encouraging local entrepreneurs, investment into local entrepreneurs, achievements, efforts, and so forth should be promoted. So there are things. Negative, here's the thing, in my view. The negative side of UNIP was simply that the struggle within the party itself of power, it got to the head of people, that they forgot that calling. And if, for example, in 1996, when President Kaunda was barred from running, what should have happened is simply that the president should have allowed somebody else to take the mantle as presidential candidate of UNIP and run. UNIP would have won. But because UNIP boycotted those elections in 1996, and that's when they lost all seats in parliament, and we were on a downward trajectory ever since then. So it's about realizing context why this happened, but those are the from my critical context.
That gives us a pretty good understanding, even in summary. But the party UNIP still has like a positive stamp on it.
Absolutely.
So would you say, as a bishop, I'll use the term resurrection?
Absolutely.
Is there room for its resurrection
I believe
to be where it was? And you, as the president of UNIP, I'm sure you're working on making that happen.
Precisely. I mean, thank you for your questions, because what we try to do is paint a picture and where the mistakes were and where we can go forward. You know, the future is always bright. As Christians, we believe in hope.
Yes.
And my presence as president of UNIP, in fact, is precisely because of that, because I reflected, I prayed about it, and I believe in that. And I believe many Zambians do, because there is a lot about UNIP that is extremely positive, that's extremely noble. And we need to get back to those values.
Yes.
So in my article, which I wrote in celebrating, reflecting on 60 years of independence, I go back to that. And one of the most positive things I talk about, of course, is we must have belief, values, moral values as a moral compass to guide us.
Yeah.
And President Kaunda himself never tired saying, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength and all your soul, and your neighbors yourself.
Yeah.
And then that's what we must do. Go back, do unto others as you like them to do unto you. We need to
Just
remember.
similar to the Ubuntu.
So Ubuntu, in fact, this is the spirit of Ubuntu. And in the context of UNIP, it was phrased as, the term we used was humanism. Humanism is, it says, how you as an individual, I as an individual, you as a human, I as a human, we're the most priceless, most important being God has created. We're made in the image of God, so we must respect each other. So the future for me is simply that let us affirm each other. Let us work together for that unity, which UNIP, as you again pointed out, my dear sister, the one Zambia, one nation motto, which is in the UNIP Constitution, and which has become the national motto. It's about the unity of all Zambians.
And in the national anthem, did UNIP have a lot to do with the wordings, the powerful words behind the national anthem as well?
Very much so, because again, I mentioned this in my article in terms of the importance of the national anthem. Many people don't realize that it's a hymn. It's a prayer, originally composed in South Africa, but God bless Africa, Kosi Sikelele Africa. Yeah. But it's a hymn, it's asking God to guide us. It's there in our hymn. So, focusing on these values, I think Zambia has a great future. But its economic side we must stress. Because the first phase, as I see, of Zambia was this political progression towards independence. Yeah. That happened. That is history. Now, the challenge before us is economic independence, self-reliance, where our people must benefit from the resources that God has endowed Zambia with. Mm-hmm. I always say to people that, look, Zambia is too rich to be poor. We have the copper now, cobalt, we got the gemstones, we got the emeralds. These are some of the very best in the world in context of tourism, in context of our agriculture potential.
And all the intellectual property. All the smart people in Zambia.
So what we need to do is to bring all the great Zambian thinkers, experts in different fields, and based on a common vision, work towards developing our country. Yeah. We're living in a very, of course, it's a global world, and we're all together. Yeah. So it must be a win-win situation. Yeah. But people must not suffer in their home country where the resources are there and it's all going out. Yes. So the government, of course, humps about this, and I'm in total agreement with that. Beneficiation, add value to what we find here. These things should not be going out. Yes. The industry should be coming into Zambia and providing jobs for our youth. Yes. And in terms of education, I would say that what should also be happening is that we must tell our education to meet the needs of developing the resources that we have. For example, the emeralds. I mean, Zambia's emeralds are the best in the world. Mm-hmm. Well, some will say Colombia, but they are the best. So we should have an education system tailored at providing education in terms of cutting and polishing and the jewelry industry within Zambia. Yes. In terms of agriculture, our products, the add value should be there. We should be having, canning factories for pineapple, for tomatoes. I'm just...
Yes, I hear you.
In terms of tourism, our industry should be geared towards teaching our young how to speak Japanese, how to speak Chinese, how to speak German. Because when the tourists come here, they can be spoken to in the language they understand. Yeah. And so these are just examples. And so the future is very bright if we can just work together.
It's very bright and it's hopeful, even from what you shared. I
Yes.
mean, there's a famous philosophical phrase that one thing that's constant is change.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
The one thing that's constant is
Yes,
change.
yes.
So if we're here, then we can only come up here.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
And when we are up here, we do our best to keep it up there as long as we can.
And keep
With
improving
with
on that.
unity.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So my last question, Bishop Trevor, is we have an election coming up in 2026. Am I assuming accurately that you will be on the ticket for the UNIP party as the president of UNIP?
Yes, according to the constitution of our party, UNIP, I was elected as the president of UNIP in 2021. And according to our constitution, we have to have a congress every 5 years. So there will be a congress before the 2026 election where we will all go to congress. And again, we're very democratic in that.
Yeah.
And then there will be the candidates either for the presidency, secretary general, vice president, and so on. And then, God willing, being elected as president of UNIP, then will be put forward as a candidate for the Republican presidency. So there is that. And in context of that, one of the things I also mentioned, because it's about unity,
Yes.
I value unity so much, and I value talent so much, is that we should be moving, and I think it's a discourse that we can begin now, with all political parties, one Zambia, one nation. What does it mean? And I think one of the things we must be looking at now is that no political party should presume to have a monopoly over wisdom.
Yes.
But that the one Zambia, one nation, in the context of coming up to 2026, is that we should have in the constitution of Zambia a provision that highlights, or rather enshrines, that there should always be a government of national unity. So whichever party wins, well and good. But the composition of the government should come from all the parties.
Absolutely.
That's very fundamental. That will promote true unity. Then we work together. We have a common vision. But having said all that as well, there should also be a provision within the Constitution, which now, at the moment, members, or rather the cabinet, has to be appointed from members of parliament. Zambia population is 20 million. Now, how can you limit yourself to a little pool of just 156 plus members of parliament and say you'll pick your cabinet from there?
Yeah.
It should now be open, that the cabinet ministers, the president should appoint members of cabinet ministers from the 20 million Zambia. You go for the best, whether within Zambia or in the diaspora, and so this will then, you will have the best minds looking at the future of the country and running the country.
That sounds like an
Yes.
absolute great input. I like your foresight of how you want the parties to be unified, and it's kind of aligned exactly with what UNIP stands for.
Very much so. And those
So
are
I'm
the-
kind of technically sitting with the presidential candidate.
You are. You are.
I haven't lived in Zambia long enough, otherwise I'd be like, consider me for a political role. But I'm an American, so I don't know how that would work. So Bishop Trevor Mwamba,
We'll depend on experts from outside. You know,
Consulting.
Zambia looks at consultants
I'd be happy to
everywhere.
consult
So
as
there
well.
we are. Where we are. But may I say just one word in passing? It's for the Zambian people, who I think we talk about the resources of this country, and of course, any country's greatest resource is its people. But in the context of the Zambian people, I mean, they're the most beautiful people ever. Golden hearts, very welcoming, friendly, fun, long-suffering.
Yeah.
And I think they deserve better from all those who profess to be leaders or seek to be position of leadership. But the Zambian people are also very smart, very shrewd, very wise. And I think that with their also belief, they're godly people.
yes.
God shall answer their prayers, and we need to work together.
There are a lot of silent geniuses here,
Absolutely.
so they need to just bring their geniusness out.
Precisely.
Yeah,
And the government and whoever's in leadership must be there to provide the
Yeah.
means of allowing that to flourish. But God bless Zambia, God bless our leaders, and God bless our future.
Amen. Amen to that. Well, Bishop Trevor Mwamba, thank you. I'm honored that you sat and chatted with me on this topic. I'm happy also to call you a new friend.
Thank you. I am most blessed indeed.
Thank you for gracing us with your information and your knowledge. And we wish you the best of luck with the UNIP, and we want to see it come back up.
It is coming back up. Thank you very much. God bless you.
God bless
Thank
you
you very
too.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.